I remember when I was 8 years old, I went to the mall with my friend Thomas, his mom, and his 5-year-old brother, Ben. Now, Thomas's mom just needed to run into Dillard's to get a few things, so we all got out and walked to the store. She was talking to the sales clerk, and we, of course, were being boys, running around like crazy while she was trying to maintain some type of composure. She finally finished her conversation, purchased her items, and turned to gather us to leave. As she turned, her face went from annoyed to panic in a blink of an eye. Ben, the 5-year-old, was gone. We spent a few minutes calling for Ben and walking around each of the clothing racks that were near the cash register, but no Ben. Thomas's mom then sprung into action, and she grabbed the nearest clerk and told them what every parent fears. She had lost her child. They locked Dillard's down. They put employees at each exit so that nobody could leave or enter the store, and everybody else that worked there began scouring the building. And I have to admit, I was getting a bit nervous at 8 years old. After about 15 minutes of searching, we went back to the original cash register where Ben, hoping Ben had returned. And we stood by the register. My friend's mom is starting to cry when we heard giggles coming from a clothes rack about 8 feet from us. We pulled back the clothes, and there sitting in the middle of the round clothes rack was Ben. And needless to say, we never played hide and seek with Ben anymore. He had won that game for eternity. In this modern day and time, we cannot imagine a child, even a tween, being lost for 3 days. With all of our technology, cars and cell phones and sophisticated police forces, with all their search and rescue equipment, it is hard for us to imagine how a child could be lost for this long. Losing a child for 3 days is a long time. Long enough for panic, despair, and anger to set in. We can well understand then how Jesus' absence must have felt for Mary and Joseph. We should not be unduly surprised that they did not notice his absence until they had traveled a day's journey from Jerusalem. In the first century, it was common for faithful Jews to travel in large groups to and from Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, as Luke says they had done every year. Because they were traveling as a part of a large group of relatives and friends, Mary and Joseph assumed that Jesus was somewhere among the group. It would not have seemed strange not to see him as they began their journey toward home with their fellow pilgrims. However, when families regrouped at the end of the first day's walk, Mary and Joseph would have noticed that Jesus was not among the band of travelers. This may have been when panic began to set in. Once they did notice Jesus was missing, they had a day's walk back to Jerusalem to look for him. And then once they were in Jerusalem, which was a very large city at the time, they had to decide where in Jerusalem to start looking for Jesus. I'm not sure first century parents panicked as 21st century parents panic, but I can only imagine the pressure Mary and Joseph felt, fearing they had lost not only their only son, but the Messiah, whom God had entrusted to their care. Panic may not even begin to describe how they were feeling by the time they discovered their calm and comfortable 12-year-old seated among the religious leaders in the temple. There is not a parent, guardian, or grandparent unable to relate to this sense of panic that would have overwhelmed Mary and Joseph and surely their community until Jesus was found. But I think we can say Mary and Joseph were worried. Anyone who has children or grandchildren in this 21st century world worries about them. The concern might not be with physically losing a child. More often, the fear is figurative. Parents worry about their children losing their way, about losing their faith, about losing their moral compass and values. However, this is classic. Jesus wasn't worried a bit. And anyone who has ever known a 12-year-old boy can understand this. What was there to worry about from Jesus' perspective? He was where he wanted to be. Jesus was doing what he wanted to do, what he was called to do. Here, Jesus offers us an example of following one's true calling and acknowledging that this can begin at a very early age. Jesus understood his own call and found his way among the teachers in the temple at a very young age. Frederick Buckner says, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." Now, I have always wondered if this particular story about Jesus being 12 in the temple isn't where the church draws the conclusion that a 12-year-old is in any way ready for confirmation. If anything, this passage should beg the question if a 12-year-old is ready for such a leap of faith. Are they mature enough? For those traditions like ours that welcome a profession of faith from tweens and early teens, this is also an affirmation. At the ripe young age of 12, Jesus was among the learned leaders of the synagogue, teaching, learning, and growing in wisdom and in knowledge. Does this sound like a lot of 12-year-olds you know? While some might argue that Jesus was not an ordinary 12-year-old, there is nonetheless an invitation in this story for the church to be welcoming and encouraging of its youth, as these religious leaders were of the young Jesus. Jesus was not shoved aside because he was too young to appreciate what the religious leaders were teaching and discussing. Jesus was fully engaged in the discussion, in the study, in the life of the community of faith. This story invites us to reflect upon a wide range of emotions at work in this transitional moment for Jesus, his parents, and his larger community. Amid the jumbled feelings of loss, fear, worry, anger, relief, joy, we can see a young person breaking free of his everyday life and beginning to discover his true identity and vocation. Risk and fear have turned to discovery and wonder. Now, in a couple weeks, on January 16th, the bishop is coming to visit. And we'll have a host of youth and adults confirmed in the Episcopal Church. It will be a joyous time for us here at St. Andrews. Our membership will grow by like 20 people. However, the best thing about that day will be witnessing youth and adults spanning generations. Youth just beginning their spiritual walk, standing with adults with decades of spiritual maturity and wisdom. We will stand with these youth and adults renewing our own baptismal vows. This must be what it was like when Mary and Joseph walked into the temple, witnessing the young and the wise learning from each other, leaning on each other, encouraging each other. January 16th will be exciting. I can't wait. Amen.